and welcome to another Wiggly World show. So today we're going to make a few different craft things that you can use either in the garden or on your balcony, and you might have to get some helpers from the garden as well, or your local park. And all you need is either a 2-litre bottle, empty obviously, and or you could use a different container that is roughly the same size, like this old plant pot here. And then you need some bamboo canes or sort of plastic straws. So either of those do, and some twigs. They're very good as well. And we're going to start off by making a bee hotel with all of that equipment. And it's not the same as a beehive. A beehive is for honeybees. And they actually don't think we've got any native honeybees left in this country. So a lot of the bees that you see around are managed by beekeepers like me, and that's fine. But the ones that we're more concerned about are the solitary bees, and they're the ones that are going to use your bee hotel, because it's the solitary bees that are often in danger. When you hear of bees being in danger, or like facing endangerment, or being threatened, it's normally the solitary bees that they're talking about, and the bumblebees. So bumblebees do live in colonies, a bit like a honeybee, but they don't live in such large numbers as a honeybee. So bumblebees only reach numbers of about 400 in their colonies, whereas honeybees can reach numbers up to 60,000. So there's a really big difference in those sizes. And solitary bees, some of them are literally in 1s and 2s, and some of them, when they lay their nests, they'll lay up to like 10 eggs, and that's it. So they're very small in numbers. And that's why it's really important, as a beekeeper myself, I try and keep my colonies down to very small numbers, and that's to make sure that there's enough forage, which is all the flowers producing pollen and nectar for them to eat. All of those, there is enough for the local bumblebees and the local solitary bees, as well as my honeybees. So the bees that we'll see later on, I will tell you the difference. So hopefully you can, when you're outside doing your walk, or in the garden, you can hopefully spot the difference. And there's nothing to worry about with bees. I know a lot of people are very scared of them. Obviously they can sting, but they don't sting as frequently as wasps. So generally in August, wasps switch their diet from meat to sweet things, so sugary things, and that's when wasps get really, really grumpy, and they might be bothering you around in the local picnic, or if you're eating outside, because we're not really having picnics now at the moment. So that's when you'll be worried about wasps. Bees will generally leave you alone unless you are unlucky enough to stand on one or sit on one, and to be fair, that's self-defense, so they won't sting you otherwise. So let's get on to the making. So if you already have a pot like this, then you don't really need to do anything to start with. For mine, I'm going to use my 2-litre bottle because I have one. So I need to squash it in half roughly, and using some scissors. Now you might need some help with this. If you're very young, get an adult to do this bit. You need to cut across. So if you're having trouble cutting there, or squashing it down, make sure you take the lid off. I should have mentioned that beforehand. And whilst we've got it slightly squashed, on one side, put a little slit in, so like a hole, okay? And then do the same on the opposite side, and that's where we're going to hang it up from later on. So it just helps a little bit if you've got some holes in there already. Okay, then get some garden twine or some string, whatever string you've got is fine. Cut a length so you can loop it round something. All right, and then maybe using a pen or a pencil or a blunt needle, or a skewer if you're in the kitchen, poke a bit of your string either end into that holes into those 2 holes that you just made. So once you've got the string through, you need to tie a couple of big knots on the end of your strings on 2 pieces, so that they don't then pull back through the holes. Alternatively, you can just tie the 2 ends together. That might be easier for you. And then that is the trickiest bit over, so you won't need adult help with a lot of the rest of it. So make sure you put your lid back if you're using the lid end. All right, and then just make sure it's all popped out. And then you need to get, if you are using straws, it's a bit easier. You just need to make sure that the straws are the right length for your container. So mine are a little bit too long, so I'm going to cut about 1 inch off. And you can just use the scissors to do that. And the tubes are actually for the solitary bees to lay their eggs in, and I will show you an already made one by a professional, and you'll be able to see the bees actually laying their eggs and going in and out from those. So lots of different size tubes means you are going to attract different solitary bees, which is the aim. So we want to make as many bees happy as possible. Now that was all the straws that I had in my house, because we've moved on to reusable straws. So I need to make sure that this container is actually packed full with different size tubes for the bees to use. And I'm going to use bamboo and twigs to do the rest of it. So if you are using a bamboo, you will need help, because you'll need an adult to cut them with secateurs, which are very sharp, to the right length as your bottle. So if you try and make sure that all of them are the same length, and pretty much it's not very scientific. We're just going to stuff it full until there is no room and nothing falls out. That's the idea. Okay, that might take you a bit of a while. And as you can see with my one, I've also stuffed some leaves and some bits of grass and stuff in there. Now, obviously the bees won't lay their eggs in the grass, but we might get some other mini bees in here as well. And again, we want to make as many mini bees as happy as possible. So quite a lot of mini bees overwinter in places like this. So they kind of hibernate. If you don't remember what hibernation is, it's when they sleep over the winter because it's too cold for them, because they can't make their own body heat like us, because we're warm-blooded. So because of that, little nooks and crannies and stuff are great for things like lacewings and ladybirds, and they'll hide in there, and if you're lucky they might even overwinter as well. So yeah, that's a really good, it's quite tight, okay, it's not going to fall out, and then it's ready for me to hang up. And I will show you what the bees do with it. I said before that these are the sort of commercial bee houses that you can buy, and hopefully we should see a bee going in or out at some point. But you can see this one's also got little nooks and crannies for other mini bees as well, just like yours does. And if we just look into some of those bamboo holes, can you see the ones that are stuffed up with stuff? So that has all happened this year, and that's solitary bees that have decided to make it their home. Okay, so we can see like these ones, those are the solitary bees. They've already laid eggs in there, and they also put some food in there as well, so usually some pollen to keep the larvae going, and then the larvae will hatch out of the egg, and then they will turn, they will eat the food, and then they will make a kind of cocoon. They metamorphosize. It's almost like the whole cell is their cocoon, so it's not like a proper hard one like a caterpillar, and then they turn into the adult bee, and then they'll come out. So it's a bit like the life cycle of a caterpillar. Also, the solitary bees are really clever, so that because males often emerge 2 weeks earlier than the females, they lay the females first, and then the males last, so they actually change which ones they're laying. So the females tend to go first in the tubes and then the males last. So they could have about 4 or 5 eggs in each tube. So the bees that will be living in here will be either solitary, different types of solitary bees will be living in here. So they could be mason bees, which generally live in brickwork, but you can find them in these kind of houses. And also carpenter bees, they tend to live in wood, so they're more likely. And leafcutter bees, they really like these little holes, and they stuff them up full of leaves, which they chew from obliging plants. So if you've got little holes in your plants, there's one's just gone in. So it's too quick for me to decide what it was, but that's a little solitary bee's just gone in. So if you are lucky enough to find little holes in your plants, in your garden, then it means you're doing a really good job by providing food for the mini bees. So it could be a leafcutter bees actually cut. They tend to be more perfect holes, the leafcutter bees, and they use those to stuff the holes after they've laid their eggs. So obviously it's the female bees doing that. So this is another type of bee house. And again, you could make this very easily if you know someone in your house that's very good with a drill. You just drill lots of holes into a bit of wood and make sure they're different sizes. So roughly the same size as the bamboo hole would be, but make sure there's lots of different sizes so you can accommodate lots of different bees. And the other thing is, my bees don't seem to like this one so more, but I think it's because it's on a south-facing wall. So as the sun rises in the east, the one that is on the west-facing wall, the west wall or the east-facing wall, gets the sun first. So that one is actually the most popular with my solitary bees. So when you do place your little bee house somewhere, make sure that you're putting it somewhere that gets the morning sun, but not too hot. We don't want it hot all the time. Just to show you a few different bees, this is a honey bee, and can you see those bright yellow bits on her back legs? So I'm saying her because all the workers that you see are all girls, and those bits on her back legs are actually pollen that she's collected. They're called pollen sacs. This is a type of bumblebee. So they tend to be a lot bigger. I'll show you a honeybee again, because the bumblebee flew off very, very quickly. And with honeybees, they tend to they pollinate the same flowers. So they go to the same flowers in a day, and that's all of them from a colony. Whereas bumblebees will go to lots of different ones, so will solitary bees. And you can tell that they're different because they're much, much smaller than the bumblebees. Now what we're going to use the other half of the bottle for is to make a wormery. Now you might have heard of a wormery. This isn't one that you can put all of your potato peelings and things in and then they turn into compost. This is just one for you to observe the worms. So I don't want you to keep a worm in here for longer than a week. So you can put a worm in afterwards and have a look at it. We need the wrapper off for this, and then put it back in the garden or the park, preferably near where you found it as well. They're not particularly territorial, but I always try and put mini bees back where I found them. I think it's just very polite. It's a nice thing to do. I wouldn't like to be moved around all the time. So you need a clear plastic bottle. You can reuse one like this, or you could have a smaller one. That's fine. Or ask one of your neighbours. I'm sure everyone's got lots of plastic bottles at the moment. So you will also need either some soil or some compost. Okay, compost is just what we call soil when it's got lots and lots of nutrients in. I'll explain how soil's made in a bit. And either some sand or some, this is actually, it's a strange one. This is like chicken gravel for them to dust bathe in. So chicken gravel or sand or something that's a different colour but quite fine. So you could use very small bark chippings, clean wooded cat litter pellets, that might work. But basically you want to be able to create layers. So sand is probably the easiest to get hold of. And what we're going to do is we're going to layer up compost and then a little layer of sand afterwards, and then keep going. So we want about 3 centimeters of each. So I'll start off with my compost, and best to do this over a tray or outside. Okay, so I've got my first layer, and then we layer up with the sand. So this layer doesn't need to be so thick, it just needs to be a different colour. Okay, so I've got my layer of sand, and then I put some more compost in. Okay, so try not to shake it, but we want nice layers. So you might have to get your hands in there to just even it out a little bit. And then more sand. Okay, like so. And then another layer. And then it should look something like this. Okay, so what we're going to do now is go out into the garden, but this could be your local park. And we will turn over some logs and stones where I know that the worms like to hide around here, and we will find a couple of worms to put in, and then we will observe them. So it's also good to have with you a piece of kitchen towel and an elastic band, because you'll need something to go on top, because some worms are very good escape artists. But let's go and have a little look at some worms. So some of the best places to find worms are under logs. So we're going to have a little look under this log here. Okay, oh, we got some beautiful centipedes. Can you see those big centipedes wandering around just here? There you go, and a ground beetle. Lovely. On nice hot days like this, it is a perfect time for looking under logs, because that is where you will find all the mini bees hiding. There's another ground beetle there. Okay, and last week we were lucky enough to find some sort of larvae, but I can't see any today. There's some big woodlice over here. Very noisy. So we'll try this log, seeing as there are no worms under that one. Oh, there's some woodlice under that pot. Nice big woodlouse. Okay, let's have a look. Ah, found a worm, definitely one worm. There's another lobworm there. So that's, just make sure the chickens don't eat him. Oh, and you've got to be really careful if, like this worm, is half in the ground. I'm not sure he's gonna, because I can see the head's over here. There we go. Oh. Right, I might have to get a spade to dig him out. So just to tell you a little bit about this worm before we put him in, can you see that thicker part of the worm? That's called its saddle. And that's actually where they mate from. So they're hermaphrodites, which means they're both girls and boys, and they still have to find another worm in order to mate though, and they put their eggs into something called a cocoon, which is just like a big egg sac, and they can have up to 20 eggs in there at once, so 20 baby worms. And they're so good for soil because they actually make soil, so they don't eat the soil. What happens is when fruit or vegetables or bits of plants rot down, when they start to get a bit mushy, so lots of other mini bees chop them into smaller bits, and then they get really mushy, and then hopefully the bacteria and the fungi start making them even squidgier, and then the worms get going on them. So then the worms eat them, and what they poop out the other end is mud. But actually it's so good for you, because, well, so good for the plants, because it's got so many vitamins and minerals from all of those plants in it, that we call it compost. So they actually make the soil, they're involved in making the compost. So I'm just going to put these on the surface of my wormery, and then I'm going to get some bits of mouldy old fruit or some mouldy old leaves or I've got to hand some mouldy old grass that was cut the other day. So I put that on top, and then once they've buried in a little bit, you can then put some water on top, and then you'll be able to see all along the sides, of your compost. You'll be able to see, as they burrow through, you'll be able to see the channels that they make and the burrows that they make. So you'll see all the good work that they're doing. So like I said, put some water just about a couple of centimeters on the top, just to make sure that they're nice and damp, particularly because I've just picked them up and they need their skin to be really damp in order to breathe, because they breathe through their skin. So it's a very strange way of breathing. We don't do that. And then put some kitchen towel and an elastic band over the top, and then check on them every day to see what they're doing. And after a few days, then you can release them back into the wild where you got them from. So thank you for joining me for another Wiggly World show, and I do hope that your bee hotels and your wormeries turned out really well. Please send us any pictures or any moving in housemates that you've got, any lodgers that you've got in your little hotels, and I hope to see you next week for another Wiggly World show at 1 o'clock. Thank you very much.